This evening, we honor more Arizona history makers. You know, this is so special. I do so many of these dinners for different causes, and this is such a special event that it's only held every couple of years. And tonight we honor more Arizona history makers. But each time it occurred to me that the event is held, we are also honoring the history-making state that we live in, Arizona itself. You'll have to acknowledge that our beauty is historic, our growth unprecedented. Arizona has given remarkable opportunities, I dare say, to every single person in this building. What other state would offer its governorship to a former softball player, a former Pontiac salesman, and a current pastry chef? Let me introduce Leslie Christensen, Historical League President, and she'll be coming up to tell you what else you have to be especially grateful for this evening. Leslie? Leslie, you're supposed to run so that the applause does not die down.
Tonight is not about Arizona Historical Society, but it's about our honorees. We have very celebrated guests tonight. We have the Arizona Code Talkers, the Navajo Code Talkers. John Driggs. Alberto Rios. Bruce Babbitt. And Cloves Campbell. The Historical League sincerely thanks you for joining us tonight and appreciates your donation to the Arizona Historical Society. Thank you very much.
And a lady who told me earlier today that she's happy that she celebrated her 40th anniversary last week because as a result of all of the hours of putting this event together, there could be a divorce on the horizon at any moment. I'm talking about Carolyn Mendoza, the gala chairperson, please. Carolyn?
I'm really not supposed to speak to you, so all I'm going to do is thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your support, and I hope you're having a wonderful evening. And we're going to get on to the people who are really important here. Thank you.
Here's someone who officially is supposed to speak on behalf of Governor Janet Napolitano, Alan Stevens, Chief of Staff of Operations for the state of Arizona. Please, if you will, join us. Alan?
Well, thank you very much, Pat. And on behalf of Governor Napolitano, I'd like to welcome you to this wonderful event. The governor's starting a tour of Arizona communities today, recognizing their treasures that they have as far as a tourism attraction. So it's really kind of linking the issue with the history of Arizona, recognizing the contributions of each of the communities. And tonight, you're joining in the celebration to honor these wonderful individuals who have provided so much for our history. A couple of the individuals I know personally, one of the great mayors of the city of Phoenix, John Driggs, Cloves Campbell, Sr., who recently passed. I was honored to be part of the celebration of his life at a church in Phoenix this summer. Secretary Babbitt, who I worked with when I was a state legislator and who has made incredible contributions to the state in terms of water policy and a whole host of issues. The Navajo Code Talkers, who anyone in America and the world now know have just given so much for freedom for the entire world in terms of their contribution during World War II and their ongoing contribution. And I know that they're recognized. Anybody who's been to the Navajo Nation recognizes that the entire nation continually recognizes the contributions, as does all of America, that these brave people gave to the country. And finally, Alberto Rios, who the governor, when she had an inauguration a couple years ago, Arizona's great poet, wrote a poem in honor of the inauguration and recognizing the fact that we are a land of many peoples, culture, and faiths. And again, on behalf of the governor, I welcome you to this great event and look forward to a wonderful celebration tonight.
This is the time when we ask not only the people who will be acknowledged and named now to stand. You don't have to remain standing because that always presents phlebitis. And I always am asked to please plead with the audience to hold your applause until the end. But we know that you have favorites here. So consider it a moral virtue on your part, what you do, when I introduce the people here who are representing the past history makers to be introduced here in the audience. And I don't know whether we're supposed to have house lights or not, or whether that's even possible, but just know that if you see a shadowy figure somewhere in the room standing up, it's a past history maker, Calvin Good, from 2003. Congratulations to you. A remarkable name in the development history of the Valley of the Sun and an enormous contributor to so many causes, John F. Long. From 2001, Esther Don Tang. And I feel obligated, since this name is written here, to acknowledge from 1992, the representative is Pat McMahon. The opportunity that we also have is to recognize special guests. From the Arizona Historical Society, the executive director, please, if you will, stand, a very special lady, Dr. Ann Woosley. Director of the museum at Papago Park and the home of the only Wallace and Ladmo Museum wing, I might add, Dr. Vicki Berger. And the Arizona Historical Society State Board President, Norma Jean Coulter. May we have a warm welcome for some of the people who keep our utilities on. Corporation Commissioner Jeff Hatch Miller. The Arizona Power Authority Commissioner Dalton Cole. Soul River Project Board member Bill Arnett is here. Let's say hi to him. And Central Arizona Project Board members Frank Barrios and Mike Boyd. Thank you very much for being a part of our gathering this evening. Now, there's one other name, and I will tell you that one of my irritants in life is the fact that we have managed to somehow diminish to a lowercase h the word hero. All you have to do anymore is to make sure that you're home when your dog comes back to be considered a hero among media folks like myself. Hero bandied around no matter what's going on. But in this particular case, I think that most Americans would consider this gentleman a true American hero, astronaut Buzz Aldrin. That's a thrill for me. Thank you for being with us. Well, tonight we are honoring specific people in Arizona who have made contributions to our lives and contributions to our state. And may I introduce the first history maker by way of our video screens, ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Babbitt.
working on a fire line, or skiing down a mountain. Bruce Babbitt's love of nature and the outdoors has guided him through a life of service to Arizona and to the nation. His grandfather was the youngest of 5 Babbitt brothers who homesteaded in Flagstaff in the 1880s. Ranchers, merchants, and Indian traders, the Babbitts were community leaders in business, local, and state government. Bruce grew up amidst the large Babbitt family in Flagstaff.
It was a really, really small town, and our lives centered about and around stuff that we were doing out of doors. I mean, I used to go deer hunting in the morning before going to class when I was in high school.
He graduated from Flagstaff High School in 1956 and went to Notre Dame planning a career in science. With a BA in geology, he went to England to pursue his master's degree in geophysics. Then he spent a summer in Bolivia doing field studies on continental drift.
Wandering through these little villages in Bolivia and looking at all the kind of human disarray and the poverty and chaos, that was the moment, really, when it started to come clear to me that I belonged on the sort of in the marketplace of people rather than in the ivory tower of all this research. Knowing that I didn't want to be an academic, the default position was law school. A law degree in this country is a license to meddle in everything. And I think I intuitively understood that. So that was the law school decision. It wasn't a large philosophical thing, a very pragmatic and correct kind of thing.
Babbitt also became active in the 1960s civil rights movement.
The events in Selma began to gather momentum in the spring of 1965. I'm in law school, in my last year of law school, sitting there bored to death and watching this stuff on the evening news as it comes to a climax. I called up my younger brother and told him, I said, come on, this will be an interesting and important moment in American history, and we ought to go, make a difference. It's just the two of us. When I graduated, 6 weeks later, I went into the anti-poverty program in the Johnson administration.
It was during this time he met his future wife, Hattie.
We were both passengers on an airplane flight from Dallas to Austin, a very short flight. I was the last guy on the plane. I was a standby. And remarkably enough, the last seat on the airplane was next to her. And we struck it up in a 30-minute plane flight. I managed to extract her phone number.
In 1968, Babbitt returned to Arizona to practice law, representing the Navajo tribe, the Arizona Newspaper Association, and the Arizona Wildlife Federation. In 1974, he made his first venture into politics.
As I had learned lawyer skills, and this was an easy bridge because I was just becoming a public interest lawyer as I saw it. And so, that led very quickly to the decision to run for Attorney General, to be a lawyer on the public side.
The whole free enterprise system is being damaged every day by antitrust violations, land fraud, price fixing, and political cronies.
As it turned out, it was a Democratic year. Raul Castro was elected governor. Carolyn Warner was elected superintendent of public instruction. We briefly had a majority of Democrats led by Alfredo Gutierrez in the Senate.
After winning the election as Arizona Attorney General, he focused on issues of public corruption and land fraud.
If there's anything good that can come in the aftermath of a thing like that, it will be the awakening of this community to the fact that organized crime is indeed a very present danger, and that we have got to treat it as such.
And we really had a lot of juice going, and got a lot done. It was really an important time. We made a lot of progress. It was, of course, interrupted by the murder of Don Bowles. We organized everybody and got the prosecution process going, and I, of course, learned eventually that I was on the list as well.
Babbitt loved the Attorney General job.
Loved it. It was a perfect combination of lawyering and public life.
Then in early 1978, everything changed. Arizona was in the midst of a devastating series of floods. Governor Raul Castro had resigned to become ambassador to Argentina, promoting Secretary of State Wesley Boland to governor. Then Boland died suddenly of a heart attack, and Babbitt was thrust into the governor's office.
One's life is surely and inevitably dictated by chance, and in this case, a pretty spectacular example of that. It really was a remarkable time. You know, Arizona is about feast or famine when it comes to water, and this was clearly way too much.
Dams were in danger of failure and bridges were washed out. He used his authority as governor to get an emergency commuter train running across the Salt River. He called the president of Southern Pacific Railroad.
I said, the issue right now is getting across this river in a community which has been cut in two. Yeah, they finally warmed up. And I guess Hattie rode the first train out to Tempe, and so it became the Hattie B.
The young Babbitt family in the governor's office was a big change for Arizona, and Babbitt found that he liked the job.
There hadn't been a tradition of assertive governors. I'm up there, and I'm finding I really like this stuff, and I'm pretty good at it.
Babbitt was elected to 2 more terms as governor. During those years, he used his veto to create a much stronger governor's office. He worked to rewrite Arizona groundwater law. He helped craft the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System, Arizona's alternative to Medicaid. And he established the Martin Luther King holiday in Arizona by proclamation. In 1988, Babbitt gained a national reputation as a candidate for President of the United States.
If you have something to say, it can be a very positive experience. You may or may not win, but you can add to the process and come out, I think, better for having done it. I am most remembered for my appearance on Saturday Night Live.
I'm sorry, sir. This is the express lane. The sign says 10 items or less, and you've got 14 items.
Oh, come on. Give me a break. The soup is 3 for $1. That's 1 item.
Still 12 items, sir.
Oh, come on. Give me a break. I'm running for president. I'm in a hurry.
Next, please.
Babbitt had become friends with Bill Clinton when both were governors. In 1992, President Clinton appointed him Secretary of the Interior. Returning to his love of the environment, during the 8 years he served in that office, Babbitt helped Clinton to protect more land as national monuments than any president since Teddy Roosevelt. He also helped return wolves to Yellowstone.
It's really interesting, the Endangered Species Act, because they were about ready to repeal it. There was so much controversy around how it is you use the Endangered Species Act to protect species. And spent a lot of time kind of meddling around running the Forest Service, frankly. It came about in an interesting way. I requalified and got my credentials as a firefighter and went back out summers onto the fire lines, working fires. It created a sensation in the Forest Service and gave me the kind of credibility coming off those fire lines and sleeping out on the ground and cutting the line and doing all that stuff to really set forest policy and fire policy. It was a great experience.
Looking forward to an eventual return to Arizona, Babbitt sums up his years in public service.
You're not going to walk past and say nothing happened. A lot happened, and I was there in the middle of it, and I think in my fair share of cases out there making it happen.
Presenting to former Governor and Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, presenter Stanley Feldman for Bruce Babbitt.
Well, I'm not going to add to this orgy of adulation by telling them good things about you because they've already heard those. I will instead tell them the real truth about you. 3 short stories that will give you some idea of what Bruce Babbitt is really like. The first is how he got to be governor. On March 3rd, 1978, Attorney General Babbitt came to Tucson to talk to his trusted advisors. Now, all ambitious politicians have 3 classes of advisors. There are trusted advisors, those are the ones who raise a lot of money. There are close advisors who raise a little bit of money, and there are just plain advisors who are looking for jobs. There were 4 of us who were trusted advisors at this dinner on March 3rd, 1978, and Bruce had called us together because he was thinking of running for governor in the next election, thinking it was possible that Governor Bolin would not run again, and even if he did run again, that Bruce might oppose him in the primary. So we started dinner at about 8 o'clock. We talked, we had a drink or two, we gave him our best advice, we were unanimous, run for governor. And then Bruce, true to form, as is usual with Bruce, said, well, I've heard your advice, you all want me to run for governor, and I've decided I'm not going to run for governor. Well, it was by now 11 o'clock, and I said, well, Bruce, don't go back to Phoenix, it's late. And he said, I've got to go back. I've got to be in Phoenix. So he got in his car and he left. Before he got to Phoenix, he was governor. Wesley Bolin had had a heart attack. And that's how Bruce Babbitt got to be governor. He was not what you would call an eager candidate, but he sure did a lot with the job. Go forward a couple of years, well, about 4 years later, 5 years later, I had, my name had gone to the governor for appointment to the Supreme Court, along with 2 others, and Bruce was doing interviews. So I'm sitting in this big office on the top floor of the state capitol, and I thought he was going to ask some questions and so forth. I sat there and I got this long lecture about the proper functions of a Supreme Court justice. They were to stay out of the governor's way. The governor had programs, and he didn't want to hear about whether they were constitutional, and certainly not that they were unconstitutional. And so I sat there with my hand like this as best I could, and he finally looked at me and said, you're not agreeing with anything I say. And I said, well, not really, Governor. And he said, you won't do what I tell you. And I said, well, not really, Governor. And he looked at me and he said, okay, I'll appoint you anyhow. So that's how I got that job. And the last story from this guy from a little town of Flagstaff is some years later he was Secretary of the Interior, and I was in Washington at a seminar, got bored, went out for some fresh air, and was walking around, and I realized I was in front of the Interior Department building. So I talked my way in by showing my Supreme Court card from the state of Arizona, and I got up to the top floor, the Secretary's office, and I walk in the door, and there's his personal private secretary, who could only be described as the Dragon Lady, who looked at me as I walked in, as if to say, who are you and what are you doing here? And I smiled at her and I said, I'd like to see Secretary Babbitt. And this look of horror crossed her face, and she looked at her book. She said, you don't have an appointment? And I said, no. She said, well, and I said, well, just tell him that his friend Stanley Feldman is here from Arizona. She said, no, I can't do that. I said, well, why not? And she said, well, because we don't do things that way here. You don't have an appointment. You can't see the secretary. So I said, okay, I'll just sit down here and maybe he'll leave his office and I'll say hello to him. And say, you can't do that, she said. I said, well, I'm going to. So I sat down. I'm there about 20 minutes. She's looking at me. I'm looking at her. I go back to the desk and I say, why don't you just tell him that his friend from Arizona is here? And I said, look, I can promise you he won't be mad. Just tell him that. So she said, well, next time I go in his office. So about 10 minutes later, she goes in his office and she comes out with this look of surprise on her face. And she said, the secretary said, would you mind waiting 2 minutes? And he'll be with you as soon as he's finished with his call to the White House. So I said, okay. So I sit there and wait. He comes and gets me, takes me in. And here is this office, which is a block long, literally a block long. He sits at one end. There's chairs in front, and there's a conference table with chairs, and then there's a sitting area with couches and chairs, and then there's another. It's a block long, and two fireplaces, right? And I said, Bruce, I said, you finally made it. And he said, yeah. And it's true. He finally made that, and he finally made the state of Arizona much better than it had been before he was elected, or before he became governor and then was elected for 2 more terms. So it's my privilege to present to you the award from the Historical Society. I'll let you uncover it when I get it out of the... There you go.
Thank you, Stanley.
Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stanley, thank you very much. I just want to tell you how moving an evening it is for Hattie and me to be back in our state of Arizona with all of you, reliving so many wonderful moments in our lives. I appreciate the recognition because history recedes into the past, and I was actually reminded of that a couple of months ago. I was in Tucson, and I was checking into the Westin La Paloma Hotel there, and the manager came out to greet me. He had obviously heard that a former official was in town. And it was really wonderful. He walks out to greet me in the lobby, and he says, Mr. Babbitt, welcome to Tucson. Is this your first visit to Arizona? Well, I want, lastly, just to say that by honoring us tonight, you are, of course, honoring Arizona, and you are honoring yourselves and all of us as Arizonans, because this venture that we call the campaign of history is not just about a few leaders. It's about all of us and the way that we face the future in this extraordinary state. I'm reminded of one of my favorite stories in conclusion. I remember reading some years ago about a traveler some time back, centuries back in Europe, who happened upon a group of workers around a pile of stones. And the curious traveler asked the first one, "What are you doing?" And the man looks up and says, "I'm a stone cutter." And not entirely satisfied, he walked along, turned to a second one and said, "Can you tell me what you're doing?" And he dropped his chisel and responded. He said, "I'm a stone cutter working to support my family." And he then happened upon a third person and asked the same question of, "What are you doing?" And that third man dropped his chisel, looked up, and said, "I am a stone cutter building a great cathedral." And that's really, it seems to me, what we are about in this state in front of our evolving history. We are all building the future. Thank you very much.
Bruce Babbitt. I want to make sure that I make notes for the news tomorrow on Monday's television show. Excuse me just a moment. Supreme Court Justice Feldman insults government employee by calling her Dragon Lady. Everything is a story when it's a slow news day. Here's somebody you're going to see biographically that never saw a slow news day or a slow contribution day in his life, Cloves Campbell Sr.
Throughout his life, Cloves Campbell proudly broke barriers and fought for the rights of those in need. Campbell came to Arizona in 1945 at the age of 14 with his widowed mother, 3 brothers, and 1 sister. He grew up at the Matthew Henson Housing Project in Central Phoenix, determined to get an education and help his family to live successfully in the West. While working numerous jobs, Campbell was also a star athlete in high school and college. After a stint in the Army, marrying, and starting a family, he graduated from ASU with a teaching degree in 1958.
I had a college education. I got out of college at 1958. And I was a janitor at APS, and it wasn't until a couple of years later that I was able to get a job as a meter reader. Now, mind you, they had same guys on the same football team with me, white guys, who went right from the college to APS and got a good job in different departments.
Campbell got involved in community affairs to improve his South Phoenix neighborhood and was elected to a seat in the Arizona House of Representatives in 1962.
It wasn't until I got elected to public office was I promoted into public affairs. And it was said at the time that Cloves Campbell was the only black in town that had an executive job, as they said.
Nationally and in Arizona, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum.
By and large, you still had the problem of jobs. That was probably one of the biggest problems that we had. Being in the legislature, that was one of my basic #1 hidden agendas, to try and put as many blacks into state, city, and county jobs. Because we had something like, 15,000 jobs at the state level, and the only blacks who was hired there were on the elevators and janitor jobs. Well, I set out to change that picture.
In 1964, the issue was public accommodations.
Well, you were denied those rights to go into a public place of public accommodation, into a restaurant, into a hotel, into a drugstore, sit down and have a soda like anybody else. The same thing that they wanted us to go to the Army to fight and protect, something that we couldn't use. Now, can you imagine going into the Army, fighting for something that you can't use? What kind of attitude you got?
Legislation was introduced in Arizona to require public facilities to be open to everyone.
Well, we had it pending in the House, and it wasn't moving.
Protest marches and demonstrations were held at the Capitol, and in March 1964, a major protest was organized.
Because you had a bunch of young people who hell far bent on making sure that the message got across. We wanted the public accommodation bill. Unfortunately, the police started to come down and wanted to arrest people because they started blocking off entrances to the state buildings. It made the community more aware that we need to do more. And actually, that's what happened. We got more people involved.
The Public Accommodations Bill eventually passed, and in 1966, Campbell was the first African American elected to the Arizona State Senate. He continued to work for his constituents.
As I said, my hidden agenda in the legislature was to break down the job barrier, which I set out to do. For instance, I got the first highway patrolman on, broke that barrier. First black into the Fish and Game Commission. And if I recall correctly, I think I negotiated, I worked out a deal getting the first black hired as teachers at the university.
He worked to improve education in many ways, helping to establish South Mountain Community College and to change textbooks.
Well, in the textbooks, I found out that Dick and Jane needed some new friends. So I introduced legislation to change that. And if you look at the books, history books, the books today, you will see that they got some different friends now with different colors, different hair texture, different types of eyes.
Campbell served a total of 10 years in the Arizona legislature. As a member of the Arizona Consumer Council, he worked to have bread and milk labeled with dates. Campbell introduced legislation in 1970 to create a holiday to honor Dr. Martin Luther King. He said later, "Little did I know that the jury would be out in Arizona 23 years." While making friends at all levels, as a state legislator, he considered himself an independent Democrat and proudly stated, "I was unbought and unbossed." He was proud of his reputation for rocking the boat at the Capitol.
The lawmakers said there is trouble at the prison. We were there to help, but we're not allowed in, as Warden Iman put it, because we were black. Senator Campbell said he thought it was time for a more progressive prison administrator.
We feel the burden of proof or any unrest at the prison is now the responsibility of the 73-year-old warden.
Basically, what you had to do, like I did myself, put myself in a position where they had to listen to me, because all the money comes from the legislature. It is just a simple rule that still prevails today. Those who got the gold rule, and that's the golden rule. And so, you exercise it.
Campbell was always active in many community organizations. He was board chairman of the South Phoenix Salvation Army, state president of the Arizona chapter of NAACP, and a coach for Pop Warner football. Campbell also worked 31 years for Arizona Public Service, where he created Project Go, a program that encouraged young people to turn their dreams into reality through education. Campbell was disappointed for many years that the Arizona news media did not cover the accomplishments and activities of the African American community.
One of the best friends we had at the time during those days was television, because they showed people for what they were.
In 1969, he became owner and co-publisher of the Arizona Informant, using the slogan, "We record Black history. 98% of our news you won't find in any other news media in Arizona." For many years, he was editor, reporter, and photographer. It was always a family business, first with his brothers and later with his sons. Today, the award-winning Arizona Informant is the state's oldest and largest African-American weekly newspaper. Throughout his life, Cloves Campbell made his home, raised 4 children, and ran his business in South Phoenix. He believed in working from within to improve the community. He told successful residents, "You as leaders need to stay where the teenagers are to present an image they can look up to." He proudly titled his autobiography, "I Refuse to Leave the Hood."
So things have actually changed for the better. These are the best of times, and people have to make the best of their time in enjoying it and improving the quality of life.
Here to make the award to Cloves Campbell and all of the contributions that he has made over the years. As a history maker, here is former Phoenix City Councilman Calvin Good.
As I was waiting until Cloves Campbell Jr. stepped forward. Two years ago, I stood here and accepted an award from this group, as they're pleased and honored. And I'm sure that if Cloves C. Campbell Sr. was here, he would also state that he was pleased and honored to be here this evening. That was a great video, and as president of the Carver Museum and Cultural Center, I'd like to have a copy of that video to put it in the museum. Cloves served on the board there, and I miss him greatly, his humor and his contributions to that museum. You know, every time I go to the grocery store to buy a loaf of bread, I look at the label and I think of Cloves. Because history in the past was that some of the stale bread they would send to South Phoenix. I'm grateful to him for that, same way with milk and some of the other things that he was able to do. So certainly this is a great day for us, and you know, there's been a lot of things written about Cloves and the contributions he's made. And those things, certainly this video really tells about the man. And I was impressed with the write-up in the program today. And I certainly would urge you, those of you who'd like to know more about Cloves C. Campbell Sr., read his book. Cloves C. Campbell Jr. has them for sale. And it certainly gives you that kind of insight into the kind of man he was, sacrificing his life, his little money he made there sort of a project to help people in this community. And we are all better because Cloves was there and the legacy that he left for us to follow. So I say to you tonight, if there's nothing else, remember Cloves C. Campbell. He's indicated that the job is not over yet, folks. You know, one thing, we celebrate the anniversary of the Supreme Court decision 50 years ago, and we have some statistics will show that we have more de facto segregation than we had back then. What we're saying to you, the job is not done, and certainly Cloves is a living example of doing the kind of things that all of us must make a commitment to do. But I'm here to make the presentation. Let me do that. Present this to you from the Arizona Historical Society.
I want to say thank you from the Campbell family. I know that you all have been here for quite a while this evening, so as Elizabeth Taylor told her 8th husband, I won't keep you long. I'd just like to say a couple of things about my dad, and you saw a lot of information about him as a legislator, a newspaper man, a lot of different things, but through all of that time, he still had time to come to a parent-teacher conference. He still had time to come to my first basketball game. Still had time to come and get me when I had my first knee surgery. So he's been there, and it was remarkable to find out as a kid that you don't realize the accomplishments your parents are doing. I know he would be thrilled to be standing here with the likes of Governor Babbitt, Mayor Driggs, the Wind Talkers, and our family is just totally appreciative of this award, and we hope that we will be able to continue to help preserve history through our publication, which does only record African American history 98%. You don't find anywhere else. But I do want to say thank you, and we appreciate the award. Thank you very much.
Since I got here just about the time the Ho-Ho-Coms left, I have seen a number of mayors. And one of the most memorable happens to be highlighted this evening as a history maker, former Mayor John Driggs.
John Douglas Driggs, a businessman, former mayor of Phoenix, historic preservationist, and pianist.
I don't know why the folks started me on piano rather than violin or something else, but it's fun to sit down at the keys occasionally. It's like a piece of furniture that you can do something with other than sit on it.
say Driggs never met a project he didn't like. Not surprising, considering his commitment to family and church taught him early about community obligations. His mother's pioneer parents came to Arizona from Utah by covered wagon in the 1870s. They homesteaded in Thatcher. His father's large family came to Arizona after hearing about a land of opportunity.
And the whole family moved down in 1921 and planted the cotton crop. That happened to be the year of the cotton crash, when the price of cotton went from $1 a pound to 25 cents a pound overnight.
The family had to start over again. His father, Douglas, got his first job in banking. He was soliciting savings accounts in southeast Arizona when he met and married Effie Killian. They were living in Douglas when the first of their 4 children was born in June 1927. They named him John. Later that year, they moved to Phoenix, where his father, uncles, and grandfather helped create Western Building and Loan Association, which later became Western Savings and Loan. Again, their timing was not good. It was May of 1929.
Of course, that was a great year to start a financial institution, because we all know what happened in October of 29, the crash, but this fledgling institution survived that and grew until in 1945 they actually had $2 million in assets.
John's young life was spent between Phoenix and his grandfather's farm in Thatcher. He attended 2nd grade there and had to win the respect of his rural classmates. One boy challenged Driggs to a fight.
I gave him a bloody nose before one of the teachers came and broke up the fight. So in that case, the city slicker kid won out over the tough farm kid.
Most of his schooling, though, was in Phoenix. Driggs was editor of his high school newspaper and even took a run at becoming student body president.
I lost my first big political campaign.
After a stint in the Navy at the end of World War II, Driggs started college, but soon decided it was time for his church mission. He was sent to New England. There he saw his first snowfall and learned to get along with all kinds of people. Driggs would later put what he'd learned in his 2 years of mission work to good use in the community. After returning west, he enrolled in Stanford. He majored in economics, but told his advisor that wasn't where his heart was.
And I said, well, Professor, I'm expected to go into the family business, but I really have a feeling that I would like to do some things that relate a lot more to community, and I'm not all that excited about the mundane business world.
After graduation, Driggs joined the family's growing business in Phoenix, and he married Gail, a school teacher, and started a family. John Jr. was the first of 5 children for John and Gail, all boys. John Sr. also started his vocation of community service representing Western Savings.
A basic obligation of any business is to be a good citizen and to participate as much as we can.
He joined the Civic Center Management Board in their effort to improve the area of Central and McDowell.
I was chairman of the fundraising committee for the Phoenix Theater Center. And I can remember my first venture in that was to get companies to sponsor performances.
He also worked with the Boy Scouts, the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, and the Phoenix Growth Committee, which was dedicated to persuading the public to spend money for new municipal facilities. Driggs led a capital bond campaign.
Airport, water facilities, police buildings, parks.
There are 11 propositions, all passed. As a result, in 1969, Driggs was asked to run for mayor.
I voted for Milt Graham in 1967. I'm not going to vote for him tomorrow, though, because I feel it's time for a change in City Hall.
The whole entire charter government slate won, with one exception.
After nearly 1 week at City Hall, I have a renewed appreciation of the complexity of city government.
As mayor, he was soon embroiled in his first major crisis.
We had a private bus system at the time in Phoenix, and we woke up one day and read in the paper that they were They were going to fold up their tent and take their buses back to St. Louis and just stop bus service in Phoenix.
Despite strong opposition, Driggs and his city council decided the city should take over the bus system. During his 2 terms as mayor, he also dealt with a public housing crisis and the rapid growth of Phoenix.
I made it one of the city's highest priorities to develop a program to save the Phoenix Mountains. And that, I think, might have been one of the most significant parts of my administration as mayor, the fact that we did indeed save the Phoenix Mountains and started that whole preservation program.
During his time as mayor, Driggs also got serious about preserving the history of Phoenix. One focus was a Victorian Rawson house downtown.
I had gone to church right next to it as a boy, and I'd wandered by this house thinking it would make a great haunted house. And so I just made it a project when I became mayor to do something on that house.
After an unsuccessful campaign for governor, Driggs was asked to head a restoration committee for the Rawson House. It took 5 years to complete that task. He worked for Western Savings during the restoration.
So as it turned out, the ultimate cost of to restore the Rawson House was about $750,000. And I think that when I totaled up all of the Western Savings cash contributions, in addition to my time, it might have approached $200,000. And incidentally, the whole house took just 6 months to build in 1895, and it was built at a total cost of $7,500.
Driggs got involved with the Phoenix Historical Society and helped it become part of the Arizona Historical Society. He also worked with Phoenix food banks and helped create a national food bank organization.
So that was the start of the organization of the Second Harvest Food Network, which now incidentally has become one of the largest charities in the United States. And it all started right in Phoenix.
Driggs continues to make big plans. His current project, restoration of another Phoenix landmark, Tow-Free Castle.
Once it's finished, they will want to use that as kind of an official reception place.
Tow-Free Castle was built in 1929 by an Italian immigrant to be a hotel. Instead, it was sold to the Tow-Free family, who ran the nearby stockyards, to be their home. Driggs' plan would combine the restoration of Tow-Free Castle with improvements in Papago Park to make it one of the focal points for the upcoming Arizona Statehood Centennial. As John Driggs works to preserve history, he is also proud of Arizona's growth and change.
Instead of being sad, you just want to enhance your legacy perspective, be more aware of the beautiful memories of what it took in the process to get us where we are now. It's just been like being involved in a great parade of growth.
Here's a man who just simply refused to believe that Phoenix and the Valley of the Sun has no history. To present the Historymaker Award to John Driggs is Gary Driggs.
I'm the younger brother here, so I know the real story. John and I shared a bedroom when we were growing up. He set a good example. I always saw him say his nightly prayers every night. And he always was a great big brother. When I faltered on my possibly not going to Stanford, he drove all night from Stanford to get down to Phoenix to make sure that I made that decision. So as a little brother, I've always had a great big brother. And I can tell you, of all the things about John Driggs, persistence is the most significant characteristic that he has. he is relentless in achieving an objective, and he's just like a heat-seeking missile when he gets his mind to do something. And just a couple of little instances. Once he needed a vote on the city council to pass something really important. He left the meeting, drove over to get a councilman that wasn't in attendance, brought him back to the meeting, got the vote done, and then took him back to his job. So John will do whatever it takes to get the job done. When the Rawson House was being restored, the people said, well, let's just use the period hardware. He took the hardware, put it in his motorhome, drove to California, drove around till he found a place that would replicate the exact hardware so it would be exactly the way it was originally. So John has really done a terrific job in so many things, but I always looked up to him, and I got to tell you, growing up, he had a drawer at the bottom of his cabinet that was full of lipstick-covered handkerchiefs from his dates with the girl next door that he was going steady with in high school. And I looked up to him and said, I'd like to be my brother, and I'd like to be part of that action. And so I'd like to present to you and give this award to John, the most persistent man I know, and the guy that gets the girls.
Boy, I tell you, what a younger brother. You know, I tell you, well, this is really a great evening, and I just think the Historical League is so great to have come up with a series of programs like this, and I am, of course, deeply honored by this. Let me tell you that it was just a few years after the Phoenix Historical Society was founded in 1973 that this great organization started. I think it actually got its official start in 1979, but has just done a tremendous work ever since. As far as reflecting on some turning points in my life, I can since there was quite a bit of the political side on this little film sketch, I can remember a few years after graduating from college, I was with my parents in Spokane. Dad was up there presiding over a mission for the church, and I said, Dad, what would you think if I decided to go into politics sometime? And Dad said, son, not on your life. Not on your life. You've got to go into the business and just think about, developing the ability to run a savings and loan association. Forget about politics. Well, it was about at least a decade later that the Charter Government Committee asked me to run for mayor, and so I went back to Dad and I said, Dad, what do you think? He says, well, I think you ought to do it. And I think that of all the decisions, other than the good decision to marry Gail, perhaps that moment when I said, okay, I'll run for mayor, perhaps was the most significant decision I ever made, because it not only was a great opportunity to work in this community, but it just seemed to directly or indirectly open up so many other opportunities, and I feel so blessed and fortunate to have had some opportunities to work in this community, and have enjoyed every minute of it. And this is such a great place. I know when I traveled around with mayors from large cities across the country in the 70s, when we were trying to promote and did promote federal revenue sharing for the cities. Phoenix, when I tell them about our political environment here, all the other mayors, whether they were from Boston, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, they just couldn't believe the unique brand of politics and government in this community. And I just feel very fortunate to have had an opportunity, and I greatly appreciate this evening. Thank you.
John Driggs, would you just love to be at John's table as Gail leans over this evening and says, "What handkerchiefs?" You know, earlier this evening I was talking about the fact that in this room that I truly believed that hero was a designation that I would apply to astronaut Buzz Aldrin. We are fortunate that we are surrounded by heroes, because I also would include the Navajo Code Talkers.
In recent years, the Navajo Code Talkers have become a familiar sight at special events. In their gold shirts and turquoise jewelry, they raise the flag at dedication ceremonies, and they're honored in parades. The Navajo Code Talkers today are credited with helping the United States win the battle for the Pacific in World War II. But it all started very simply. Shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Navajos who were fluent in both Navajo and English were recruited from boarding schools and communities throughout the reservation to join the U.S. Marine Corps. Carl Gorman was working in Window Rock.
And in 42, one day we heard over the radio that they wanted 30 Navajos for special duty.
Merrill Sandoval was only 17 when he volunteered.
We just figured that they were taking us into the Marine Corps and everybody wanted to go. You know, in that time when the attack was so sudden.
Joe Calwood was 21 and working at the Army Ammunition Depot near Flagstaff.
I want to be one, you know, the best fighting man the United States have.
Sam Billison had just graduated from high school in 1943.
Well, in those days, they used to have captions in the newspaper and radio that the few, the brave, the Marines, and I really wanted to be one of those.
And we didn't know we're going to be code talkers, you know what I mean? Myself, I just put in for scout anything, you know, when I enlist.
After boot camp, young Navajo recruits were sent to Camp Pendleton, the U.S. Marine training base near San Diego. There they attended a special school.
At the time I was transferred there was over 200 Navajos in one barrack. And we found out they had a school there that we had to attend. But they didn't tell us what for. Until we got into the classroom, that's when we found out. And when we got in, there was a whole bunch of Navajos in there, in classes. They told us that they were going to use our language to go into communication for the Marine Corps.
Billison was disappointed when he arrived.
I just came from the reservation. I don't want to be with these Navajos. I want to be with the Marines. But we got there, registered, and start the program, and it got real interesting, so I stayed with it.
The first group of 29 used the Navajo language to devise a communication code. They created a dictionary using Navajo words as letters of the alphabet and for military terms.
We coded the alphabet from A to Z. And then we started coding a lot of the war material. So we had about around 300 war material that was named or coded.
We had to learn English in military terms, military equipment, military rank, no Navajo word for grenade, artillery, dive bomber, aircraft carrier.
And this is what the code is. Something short, something you are familiar with. Anything that you're familiar with, it's hard to get out of your head things, you know.
The dictionary and code words all had to be memorized during training.
We couldn't be carrying any references out there in battle, so we memorized everything. At that age, I guess we were pretty good at memorizing.
The code talkers took part in every assault the Marines conducted in the Pacific Theater. Their primary job was to transmit messages in code by radio and telephone about troop movements, tactics, and vital battlefield orders. The code talkers were on the front lines when the U.S. troops landed at Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal.
We were with 5th Marine Division, and our job was to invade Iwo Jima, so that's what we did.
That's where we landed February 19, 1945. And it was a rough landing, and we had so many ships. I think we had about 10 or 12 aircraft carriers. Our beach was a mess. Dead Marines, equipment, oh boy. And if the Navy didn't get us in straight to the beach, the thing was that our little boats would start going over. Ours turned over. So we actually had to swim ashore.
A lot of people think code talkers were sitting somewhere in the rear echelon talking radio, but we were out in the front line. That's where the messages have to come from the front line back to the headquarters, and sometimes to the airplanes, sometimes to the ships.
And see, I was with headquarters signal company. I was with a major general all the time. Major general and a brigadier general. And it was about 5 or 6 of us. Since we're in headquarters, that's where we were to transmit messages down the line. And they had Navajo code talkers down the line. We had a lot of work to do. Informations, commands, and they give it to us, and we just go to our radio, translate it in the code. And on the other end, the Navajo code talker receives it, and he translates it back to English and give it to their commanders. And it's so fast. It just took only maybe a minute, while the other code they've been using, they call it American Morse code. If their messages took 15 minutes, ours took 2 minutes. That's how fast it was. And no mistakes. That's the way we were trained. So we did our job that way.
The Navajo code talkers faced a unique hazard. They were sometimes mistaken for the enemy by other American soldiers.
We had the same skin as the Japanese, and probably acted like the same Oriental people. We had guards, Marines guarding us day and night. You know, every place we go, there is a guard that goes with us.
The Japanese were proud of their skill in breaking codes, but they were baffled by the Navajo language.
Who would think that a bunch of sheet herders would develop a code that nobody broke? Japanese didn't break it, the Marines didn't break it. So I always say that there must have been some help from somewhere, spiritual help. And these were all young kids, 17, 18, 19.
The Navajo code was so valuable in winning World War II that it remained a classified secret until 1968.
We were sworn to secrecy when we got discharged. They told us that we might use you again in case, we go back to war.
We were a special group, but we never realized it until after the war was over.
We never knew the magnitude that we contributed to World War II until after 1968, when the code was declassified. We just fought with the Marines, and that's what we did.
Only in recent years have the men who served as Navajo code talkers received the awards and recognition they deserve. At a Marine Corps reunion in 1969, they were presented with a special medallion. In 2001, they finally received the Congressional Medal of Honor. The Code Talkers are modest about their role.
I always think it was the language. It wasn't us. We just used it. It's the Navajo language that did the work. I always think that it's the language that should be honored.
Between 1942 and 1945, more than 400 Navajos served as Code Talkers. Today, less than 100 of the Navajo Code Talkers are still alive. Now in their 70s and 80s, they appear at special events, and they sign some of the many books that have been written about their heroic work in World War II. The Navajo Code Talker Association works to tell the true story of the Code Talkers and to promote education for future generations of Navajos.
I always tell them that they should speak their language. They should live their culture. And I tell them that we found that Navajo language was very powerful, very sacred, very beautiful.
The Navajo Code Talkers are part of a long tradition of Native Americans who have proudly served in the U.S. military.
To all the Native American Indians, North America is still our country. That's why we fight for it. We call it our mother country. So when somebody tries to take your mother away, what do? You fight for it. You protect it.
Just like our ancestors tried to do. They're still doing it. And it's just a tradition that our chiefs, our warriors, we act like warriors in the old days, just like the same way. Dedication to our homeland.
You know, as the rest of the country celebrates the Super Bowl weekend and the golfers celebrate FBR, the Open, going on here in the Valley, how proud we are that we can just simply quietly embrace the Navajo Code Talkers as ours, only ours. Ladies and gentlemen, here they are representing all of the Code Talkers. And I'm talking about these people who will be coming to the stage right now. Joe Kelwood, Albert Smith, Keith Little, as presented by Native American leader Peterson Zah. Please join us.
Thank you. My grandpa, Joe, here tells me, he says, it's past my bedtime. They'll make it short. Like all Navajos and all other American Indians, we always greet you by saying hello or good evening to you. Yate. Let's see you say it. Yate. Yate. Okay, you're already a code talker. Yeah. Ya means heaven. Te means beautiful. So, from heavenly bodies, we bring to you the beauty of the land, the mother, and everything that the earth and the universe is all about. Imagine back in 1940, you know the life in America, what we went through. On the Navajo Nation, it was no different. We had a big snow in the 40s. Navajos call it Yasdatso. And our animals, many of them died. Sheep, cattle, horses. And then we also went through some trying times during the Depression with you. And that really had an impact on Navajo life. The unemployment rate on the Navajo Nation, for example, was staggering. And young people were looking for jobs. They wanted to work because they all learned how to be responsible at such an early age because of the family situation. As it was indicated by the film, the Japanese people took pride in breaking every code that was sent by the United States. So they knew whatever we were doing, whatever orders were given. And so one day, a Navajo missionary, a family moved out to the Navajo Nation, and they were out there for several years. And a young kid by the name of Philip Johnson learned how to speak Navajo. He had a lot of Navajo friends. They played together out in the schoolyard, and they became good buddies. And Mr. Johnson also participated during World War I, and he often thought about this. And he thought to himself, maybe during World War II, we ought to try Navajo language. But he really didn't know quite how to do it. So he got together 29 original Navajo Nation code talkers. One of them was Carl Gorman. And they developed the military code using the language. Ordinary Navajo who may live here in Phoenix couldn't understand what they were saying because you had to actually live the culture in order for you to understand what was being said. So even though if you were a Navajo living in Salt Lake City or San Francisco or Washington, you couldn't really understand it yourself. I say these individuals were geniuses because in America, when somebody does that, that's what we call them. But it took a long time for them to get the recognition that they have just now received recently by the United States. As one of the generals said, that these men participated in every assault out in the Pacific without one single mistake during those periods. In the film, the word of Samuel Billison, who recently died and was the president of this organization, I think said it very eloquently when young men who are Native American are often being asked, why do you fight for the United States when the government doesn't always treat you right? According to Mr. Billison, when our mother, the earth, North America, is being attacked, we feel a great responsibility to respond. And that's why we fight for our land. We call it our mother country, so when somebody tries to take your mother away, you fight for it. You protect it as much as you can. I think that's something that needs to be repeated over and over for all of us to understand. Tonight, we have 3 representatives of maybe a little less than 100 Navajo Nation code talker that's left. And I would like to call on my grandfather, Albert Smith, to come forward and receive this award. I think I left it over there. Can somebody give it to me? Albert Smith.
Did anybody understood that? That is part of the code. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. An honor to be here. I'm Albert Smith. We have come a long ways, but people always ask me as I lecture across the country, why did you fight for a white man's war? I said, it's not a white man's war. It's also my war. A foreign country wanted my country, which stands for my freedom to cry, to laugh, to sing, to talk to my spiritual father anytime I want to. And at the time when I enlisted, I was just 15, out of the 8th grade. And I went in because I had already had enough adult responsibility at that age. So a lot of people today would ask me, you were just a child. To me, I was not a child. I had responsibility already. And some people say, it's been a long time before these awards came out. I said, no. Mother Earth already awarded me when I came home. I didn't have to have a band. I didn't have to have a grand marches to welcome me. Mother Earth hid me from the enemy so that I could travel even among the enemy front lines without being seen, without being heard. So that is why, ladies and gentlemen, America has paid a heavy price. Enjoy Mother Earth. Take care of her so that we can continue living in a free society, a free world. Thank you. Good evening.
Keith Little.
This light is so bright. Thank you. It is a privilege for me to be here for this Historymakers honoree as one of the honorees of the Navajo Code Talkers. And I'm also a privilege for me to be recognized as one of as a representative of my comrades, these Navajo Marines that are brilliant men and who develop a code that was ingeniously schemed very shrewdly, that no one understands it. It's undecipherable, no matter who tried. And it takes a pretty intelligent person to do that. But the 29 people that develop these things work over a month developing this 250 words of military terms initially. And when they went overseas, they were met with as doubts, confusions, skepticism, and they were challenged whether they can do it accurately, precisely, and through the efforts of their own persistence on their part overcame these resistances, these confusions, these skepticism, and earned their what they really are, professional men that are very brilliant and have the great ability in code and their abilities to use the Navajo code that they developed it, implemented it, which became a very proficient and precisely accurate form of communication. And when they do that, they save lives, countless lives of their fighting men at the front and all over the country. And for that, nobody recognized them, simply because of the secrecy of the project. And it took them many years. When it was recognized, all of us had to work for some sort of a recognition of what we did. Nobody knew that we made an impact on the form of communication that was used, what they call a brilliant way, but impacting the conventional form of coding system that took a lot of time to decipher, whereas Navajo code didn't have to be unscrambled. We just encoded the messages as we sent it, and one of our own comrade, he's decoding it as he writes it down. It took only a minute to deliver it to its destination to execute what it's calling for. So this is a form of Navajo people that came along at the most critical time in our period of the world, what they call a national emergency. And we came along and did this without asking for any sort of recognition. So I'm very glad that I'm here representing my people and also as an honoree, and I'm enjoying every bit of it. Thank you.
Navajo people have a lot of sense of humor. I guess that the life that we lead, you almost have to be that way. My dad always told me, he was a councilman for many years, that you got to have people laughing with you because everything isn't so serious. And one of the code talkers who was unable to be here tonight is Thomas Begay. Thomas Begay from Chin Lee always told this story. When they were in the foxhole fighting, people will always go to him and say, "Hey, Chief, we need to have you send this message across." Or, Chief, we need to have you do this. Chief, we're very, very hungry. Maybe you guys ought to look out for some goats or something. And Thomas Begay says, he really got angry one day, and he says, "I don't want everybody in this foxhole here to quit calling me Chief anymore. If I was the real chief, we wouldn't be in this mess. You would all be back home enjoying your life and having a steak dinner, so don't tell me Chief again." Here is the incomparable Joe Kellerwood.
I like to add a little bit more here and there. I've been here in Phoenix since 1946, February 3rd. I come in from San Diego, landed in the Indian hospital with pneumonia. I'm not used to cold weather. I come here in the wintertime. I've been in South Pacific 3 years, so you know how it is. You get used to hot country. Anyhow, I've been here all those years, and I'd like to add a little bit more. The code talkers come from Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. Yes. And some of them, like me, I didn't go back to reservation. I went to school here, ASU. At that time, it's a college. and I learned a trade there, carpenter. So I've been here in Phoenix 43 years driving nails, you know. That was nice. I look at some of these History Channel. I see that some of my work where I request artillery barrage. Yeah, it's kind of things like that. It stays with you, you know. And the other thing, or always been a good Marine in my life. I come alone from reservation. I enlisted in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they sent me down here. I enlisted here in Phoenix, on Central and Van Buren, 3rd floor. From here, I went to San Diego, 4 of us. 2 white boys, 1 Apache going into the Navy, and 1 Joe Kelwood. Yeah, we went from here to San Diego, and we got to San Diego. We went to Barrett's, and here's other Navajos that come from Fort Wingate, New Mexico. And we went through boot camp half and half white, half Indian. And when we finished the school, they got their vacation back to the east. Us, we went to Camp Elliott, communication school. They got us started right away. Oh yeah, by the way, part of the first group is already on Guadalcanal. Second group is going out with the 2nd Marine Division. And the rest of us, they shove us to the school. We work hard, day and night. For me, it is spelling. Yes. So when we finish communication school, they teach you everything. Morse code, you have to go by 10 words a minute. Everything. Semaphore and paneling, and know all about switchboard. That's the way you graduate. And when we graduate, they sent us to Melbourne, Australia, 3 of us. We joined 1st Marine Division down there, and so we're bloody Aussie, you know what I mean? We spent 7 months down there, come back into South Pacific, East New Guinea, and hit Cape Gloucester, New Britain on Christmas Day, 1943. And hit the Peleliu, September 15, 1944. The last one, Okinawa, April 1st, April Fool's Day. So many of you hear me sing at Memorial Day at National Cemetery. And last year I presented the coat tuckers thing there. And there was, everybody enjoyed. I have a standing ovation for about 5 minutes. But it was something good, you know. But I did my service protecting my country, my people, the whole United States, and our allies. I found that out when I'm in Australia. They're good friends. Now, to end this, I will sing you a Marine hymn in Navajo. I went in with 7th group of the Navajo Coat Talkers. That's the one that developed this Marine hymn in Navajo. First verse. No horse ka bi ka na ila ta so kon ta sil kai ne pe ka ji do ta ka ji ta so ko en ta ti pa se da da te ni te ya Ebony Hewazen, Washington Bekos Bika Shila, Iligo Bahojon. Proud to be a letterneck. That's what it is.
One other word. We want to give you one, thank you for, thank you. We want to tell you about one other thing, just one more minute, my friend. And that is that the code talkers, as was noted in the film, get into the young kids, having them continue to learn the language, the culture, and everything. We really need your help, probably within the next year, or maybe a couple of years, on this English-only thing. That's going to be one of the projects that the code talkers will be tackling this year. I understand it's ready to be introduced or has already been introduced in the state legislature. And sometimes for people like me, not so much my grandfather's Mache's here, but it really makes me angry to see people still in the year 2005 continue to do that. When we have relied so much on the language of the native people, then we want to wipe it out. We shouldn't do that. Thank you.
The Navajo Code Talkers, ladies and gentlemen. You'll tell your kids about them. Extraordinary experience. Folks who just got here, by the way, visitors from New Jersey, I know that you'll be pleased to know then that it is not an authentic Navajo phrase when you hear Big Sale Gilbert Ortega. Ladies and gentlemen, our final history maker, and I think every state should have a poet. Ours is Alberto Rios.
The line is the thing that distinguishes the poetic art form, poetry itself. I just pretty much say I'm a writer.
It's the one gift we have.
And I teach at ASU. So I write and I teach. And the rest of it takes care of itself.
Alberto Rios brings a unique perspective to his writing and teaching. He traces it back to his parents' World War II love story. His Mexican father was a U.S. Army medic, and his English mother was a nurse. He was stationed in her hometown where they fell in love. When his father was transferred back to the States, his mother followed.
It was an act of faith, an act of love. When she got to Nogales, my father's family fell in love with her right away, and I was the first child. I had one brother. And you know, it's funny, I look like my mother, as I was saying, and you know, lighter skin, bluish eyes, and so on. But I was named after my father.
In 1989, Rios talked about his hometown for the PBS documentary Birthright.
I grew up in this house, which is in Nogales, Arizona. For those of you who've never been to Nogales, it's a small town on the border of Arizona next to what's a very large city in Mexico. Nogales has a dual spirit, 15,000 people on the American side, and with just a fence separating the two, more than 250,000 people on the other side. I think growing up, for me, it worked a little like binoculars, two lenses to see one thing more clearly.
When I grew up, the border was a place where people were connected, where we met up, where you celebrated that connection. And now, in recent years, it's where we're divided, where we're disconnected from each other, and where we're putting up big walls. I didn't grow up that way. The border I grew up with was, in essence, wide open. But it didn't scare anybody, nor was everybody clamoring to necessarily come running across, one way or the other. There was a fence, but it was like a fence you'd put between 2 yards, and it was a very minimal affair.
Here are the two worlds I saw as one. They weren't two at all. This was the binoculars at work. Two lenses to see one thing more clearly. Mexico, United States. Fence was just a fence. This is the kind of thing that I think is all through my work. This is what I write about, sitting right here.
His world also had two languages.
I knew that everything had more than one way, more than one name, and it gave me a kind of dimensionality about the world that was not one-dimensional, but multidimensional. It helped me see the depth in things all the time, if only because I could call it by two different names. You know, hand and mano, you know, two different ways to say the same thing.
Much of Rios's writing is autobiographical.
I think that particular growing up made me this particular person. And certainly as a writer, these are things I try to capture. I think of them as adventures. And it helps articulate the human experience, which I think has value. Doing that helps us see what we have in common.
Rios said he began writing in junior high school in the backs of his notebooks. He didn't call it poetry.
So what I recognize now is I was writing because I needed to write. The backs of my notebooks started to get bigger and bigger, you know, eclipsing the front of the notebook.
He earned a scholarship to attend the University of Arizona. With no particular career in mind, like many students, Rios looked in the course catalog for an easy class.
But I get into the English department, and then I find English 9, Introduction to Poetry Writing. Nothing sounds engaging to me yet until I get to the last line in that course's particular description that particular year. At the end of it, it said, "No final." I said, that's the class for me. I signed up for English 9, Introduction to Poetry Writing, but the trick was on me, of course. No final because you're doing it the whole way through. But a moment of reckoning came that pushed me in a direction I kept going in.
After getting degrees in English and psychology, Rios decided to go to law school.
This was great. I had 2 degrees now. I was in law school. My parents were proud of me. And at the end of that first year, everything seeming so right, I was faced by its counterpoint realization. I could do it. Did I want to do it? I had to make the decision. And what I realized is that I wasn't quitting law school. I had quit writing. And it was time to go back. Just before I graduated, I got into Artists in Education, which back then was called Poets in the Schools program. It's hard to explain the work because you only go in for a week at a time, but it was like a blaze of lightning. So it was always intensity, it was always new, and it was always exciting. And then in about 1980, I started a community writer in residence program, and it was based on the agricultural extension agent model. This was in Pinal County, and I went all over that county. I worked with ranch wives who were writing memoirs. I worked in libraries. I worked in elementary schools. I worked with creative writing clubs, and it changed my thinking about what an effective classroom is forever. You can't tell people how to do it. You've got to practice it.
About this time, Rios won his first national award, the Walt Whitman Award for a first book of poetry.
And it was a pivotal career kind of award, very good. And ASU called me and asked me if I'd like a job. And I allowed as how I probably would. And I've been there for 22 years. It was never a neat pathway, and it was never something I had in mind to do. I never set out to do that. And in fact, if anything, when I teach, it's what I didn't get taught. So I think of myself in that sort of sense of as a kind of anti-teacher. You know, what is somebody else not teaching?
Writing remains the central focus of all Rios does.
Even though I write short stories and prose and novel and nonfiction and so on, and have had a lot of success in those areas, all my writing is poetry.
In fact, Rios is the author of 8 books of poetry, 3 collections of short stories, and a memoir about growing up on the Mexican border. His latest book of poems, the smallest muscle in the human body, was a finalist for the 2002 National Book Award. Some of his recent writing has been done for special public projects. 600 little poems are set in stone along 6 miles on the Tempe Town Lake.
It's all about water and it's all about the desert. This is in a form called a gregueria, which is just a very short poem. Some humor and some seriousness connecting together in order to create a finger snap or an epiphany moment. Here's one. Nobody owns water. Drink some and try to keep it. When they figure that out, they love that. That was an experience to write something so big, but at any given moment, each of them has to be only a few words.
Rios has also written poems for Governor Napolitano's inauguration and for the visit of Mexico's President Vicente Fox.
And this was a wonderful opportunity to embrace and to expound on this notion of connection as much as separation and distinction.
Rios' advice to all writers is simple.
Every pencil is filled with a book. And as far as I can tell, pencils are doing their end of the job. So it's up to us. Pick it up, start writing. When you can't, sharpen the pencil. That's all it is.
A sun devil, a poet, and now a history maker, Alberto Rios, ladies and gentlemen, and Shelley Cone.
What a great treat to be a part of this celebration and a part of true history makers and legends here in Arizona. When I was asked if I would like to introduce Alberto Rios tonight, I was thrilled. We have known each other for over 25 years when he was a student getting his MFA at the University of Arizona. We were children. And you heard in the video, he was selected to work in the Poets in the Schools, which we call Artists in Residence now. We send poets in now for more than a week, but in those days it was a week at a time. And he introduced students, teachers, community members to poetry and creative writing, and it changed their lives. He met them in the grocery store. He met them in the community, and their lives were changed. He was a star in our program, and I was always proud to hear that when he became a faculty member at ASU, that he used some of the exercises and the techniques he learned in Eloy and Casa Grande and Florence in teaching undergraduate students and graduate students. He is a poet, a fiction writer, a playwright, and a collaborator on public art projects like Arizona Falls at Indian School on 56th Street and the Tempe Town Lake. He is a recipient of many awards and recognition, including the prestigious finalist for the National Book Award. And I remember him telling me, and the people who called had to give me a chance to call them back and make sure that this was really true and that my life would change. Among Tito's many outstanding qualities, what I particularly appreciate about him is his understanding of the role of the artist as a citizen and the responsibility of the artist to the public. For instance, 15 years ago, we invited Tito to speak at our annual lunch for legislators. We had customarily asked economic developers, lobbyists, business people, because we thought that they would make a connection with legislators as we tried every year to make the point about the value of a state's investment in the arts. When Tito spoke, They were moved by his message. There was not a dry eye in the audience. What a pleasure and a privilege to see the power of an artist, particularly Tito, to speak to all of us, legislators, policymakers, artists, arts administrators, who were all moved in a deep and meaningful way. When I talk about Tito being a public artist, he has been writing poems for public occasions recently, wanting to make sure that those public occasions have the kind of work that he shares and he can communicate with people, whether it's Governor Napolitano's inauguration, President Fox's visit to Arizona, the opening of the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Piper Center of Creative Writing at ASU just this week. He is a treasure. He was born here and has made a commitment to living and working here. Tito brings extraordinary gifts to our state and communities. He is definitely an Arizona history maker. Congratulations, Tito.
Who is that guy? Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidos a todos. Muchísimas gracias. Buenas noches. It occurs to me that hearing myself say that, it must scare somebody to death. And especially more so to know that I've done so well in an English department. But you know, as we were hearing earlier, and as the code talkers so eloquently showed us, through deed as much as action, languages are now as they have always been throughout history. Languages are solutions. They are not problems. I want to say something about Pat McMahon for a minute. I love to tell him this. When I was a kid, my parents brought us up from Nogales. Our only time we visited Phoenix. We came up to Legend City. Some of you will remember that. Pat McMahon was then hubcap of Hubcap and the Wheels. I got his autograph. I'm very pleased to say that my family is here with me tonight. My wife of 25 years or 33 years, depending on what you're counting, Lupita. My son Joaquin, of whom I'm very proud and I hope to see him up here one day. My mother, you've seen her up here, Agnes. My brother is in California. My father, I'm so sorry to say, cannot be here today. I think he would have been very, very proud. I want to say that I'm very honored to be part of this group. This is a group that has done big, honorable, wonderful things. Arizona itself is a big state, and it's got room for those things. In fact, we're the Grand Canyon state, after all. We do big things. But our days are filled as well, and perhaps much more, by the 100,000 small things we do every day. And I think that's why I'm here. I hope I have given voice to the small things, that I've honored them, valued them, and helped to show how heroic they are as well. I'm going to finish by repeating something from my days when I was in the Poets in the Schools program. I'm going to give my voice over to two students, two junior high school students. These are probably the only two poems I've ever memorized, and they're not mine. Unfortunately, I was moving so fast and going so many places, I don't remember their names, just these poems. And they're wonderful. Both of them, as all poems are, love poems. First one by a young man. These were both 7th or 8th graders. And this young man was in love with somebody else in the classroom, but alas, it was an unrequited love. She did not love him back. So he could not say her name. and he gave her the only acknowledgement he could, and he was way ahead of his time. This would have been in the 70s. He called her Ms. X. The 8th grader, Ms. X. And he said, Ms. X, you are Central Missouri. I grew up there. I had my horse there. And I want to go back. Wouldn't you like to be somebody's Central Missouri? And I'm going to finish with this one. A young lady in that same class had a boyfriend named Johnny. It seems to me all boyfriends in junior high school are named Johnny. I don't know if there's one Johnny who gets around a lot or... And here's what she said. And I just want to thank you all in advance for this wonderful evening. She said, Johnny, you're a spoon. I hold you. I eat with you. I make music with you. But you're just one of a set. Thank you all.
Alberto Rios, and all of the history makers, ladies and gentlemen, if you will. My personal thanks to those scattered few who applauded with recognition at Hubcap and the Wheels. I'm so delighted that you're actually able to raise your hands at this particular time of night and at your age. I am so thrilled to be able to share this evening. How about if we get together in a couple of years? And please know, there are memorable moments this evening I know that you're going to want to treasure. You're going to tell your family about. The best way to tell them, of course, is through the videos that are going to be available to you. And the order forms are on your tables tonight, provided by the Arizona Historical Society. And for those folks just simply creating this evening every 2 years, I say thank you, and please join me. Thank you so much. Good night.